Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. I had some technical difficulties. Sorry about that, guys. Having problems with my mic, and it just really got me really off. So let's go ahead and get that going. Great. So welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is May 1st, 2026, and tonight's episode is all about the Technate blueprint, system over man, and rise of Continental control. Last night we had a person on Rumble who had some questions, and I basically was curious, and he sent me this information about the map of Hegseth and what he was proposing, and the map of the technocrats back in the 30s. And so I started to do some investigation into that, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. It is absolutely a trip, meaning, well, let's just get into it. So, wow. So this episode traces a documented shift in how society organizes power, moving from human-centered decision making toward system-centered control. So moving from human-centered decision making toward system-centered control. That's where we're going as far as a technocrat society. We can see this all around us. And beginning with early industrial philosophy that placed efficiency above individual judgment, this show follows the development of ideas that reframed production, distribution, and even human behavior as engineered problems. It then examines the former technocracy movement in the 1930s and 1940s, which proposed reorganizing entire regions under technical management rather than political representation. Now, from there, the analysis moves into modern governance and policy, where increasing reliance on experts, data systems, and regional integration reflects similar structural tendencies. Using primary text, historical records, and contemporary policy discussions, this episode does not argue that past models have returned in identical form, but instead demonstrates that the underlying pattern, systems growing in scale, complexity, and control, has actually persisted over time. So the purpose is not to draw conclusions, but to present a clear, testable framework. As societies become more complex, authority tends to shift towards those who design and manage the systems. And what remains is the central question of the show, whether these systems continue to serve the individual or whether the individual is gradually reshaped to serve the system. Oh, God help us. Shout out to everybody on the live chat Rumble. Number one warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion says, hey, Pastor and Warrior family, glad to be back with y'all. Hey, it's good to have you back, Scorpion. What's up, pal? Number one. Number two warrior is Noel saying, good evening, good morning. Hello, James, and hi, all. What's up, Noel? And number three warrior is the Boots Man Hafner himself, the sparking spleefer, the powder room king, says, hello, James and Warrior family. Glad to see y'all. And if you all could hit the thumbs up button, help our host become the Rumble famous tech or TY, or thank you, Savvy. Yeah, if you guys can do me a favor, if you could all help me, just take your thumb and follow my thumb. Go down to your phone like I'm going, hit your X, then hit thumbs up. There you go. We got four people really watching and paying attention. Then I'm happy. And number four warrior is Philip saying, good evening, everyone. And Boots reminds us, hey, don't forget to tell a friend about James's award-winning detox formula, elitepotion.com. That's right, elitepotion.com. It's thebomb.com. Well, I didn't buy that domain, but that would be a good idea. Yeah, elitepotion.com. Get rid of parasites and heavy metals. You'll feel better, I promise. All right, and number five warrior is Philip Del Piano saying, good evening, everyone. And of course, Edged is here, number 6 Warrior. Guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. Let's get straight into breaking news.
Welcome to Shitty Breaking News with your host, James Carner, offering his shitty opinion.
So the U.S. is going to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany, according to the Pentagon. 5,000 troops from Germany. What were 5,000 troops doing in Germany? Where were they going? And is that on one of our bases that we have in Germany? I believe we do. So that's very interesting. Are we pulling out? We're basically going to stop trying to police the world. And are we going to hunker down into our little resource zone of America and stop being dependent on other globalist ideas? Well, that's what it looks like. Trump says Iran conflict is over and sidesteps Congress. He basically says, hey, it's over, but you still can't tell me to stop. That's what he says. He's like, it's not constitutional. They're like, you're not constitutional. Well, doesn't matter. He's going to do what he wants, and you guys just can't do shit about it. And the reason being is because of all the other ex-presidents, all of them and all the executive orders they put into place since the idea came into someone's head, hey, presidents need to have more power. Well, you just made a king. And no more kings, but even though we help put you in. Okay, right. What's a more secure place than the villages? Trump finds his people again in, I don't know, in Florida. Apparently the golden years is for the golden age. Golden age is for your golden years. Trump's basically saying, everybody, move to Florida. Well, facing tumults both on the political and international fronts, President Donald Trump took his economic message to his home state Friday. The reception, to put it mildly, was enthusiastic. The event was aimed at revving up seniors, a reliable voting bloc ahead of the midterms. Getting those seniors up and running. Come on, guys. Come on, seniors. Vote for Trump. Go for it. I don't care. That's on you. I just don't like politics anymore. Americans remain critical of Trump's administration approach to Iran. Do we? Are we? Well, according to the Pew research we do. The Pew research. Well, okay. Judge rebukes prosecutors for moving forward with detention proceedings for accused correspondents, dinner gunman. Oh, my. Detention proceedings. Hey, we're going to block that. What are we going to do? We're going to just let him go? Anyone can just go in there. It's like, he has rights. He has rights. He needs help. Yeah. Well, you know what happens when you don't discipline a kid. They become a bully. Thousands in U.S. join no school, no work, no shopping May Day protest. Well, it's a good idea, but don't do it on one day. If you're going to really protest and hit the pockets of the bankers, well, stop paying them. That's all you have to do. Just stop paying them. You know, you can sign up for an unincorporated association and you can stop paying taxes whatsoever. That's how the bankers do it. You see, corporations, millionaires, billionaires, they all share this information with each other. When you get it, you guys freak out and get scared. Go, oh my God, why would I go to jail? No, because you're off the records. You're legally set up as an unincorporated. And that's basically tax-free. Yeah. And my friends at unincorporatedAssociations.org, well, or is it .com? I think it's .org. Those guys, they know what they're doing. And I continue to support them. And what else is in the news? Well, that's pretty much it. I mean, good God. It just won't stop. But don't worry, we're not all going to die. All right, when we come back tonight, we're going to be talking about the technocrats taking over America. The Technate blueprint, system over man, and the rise of continental control.
We are being lied to about our sovereignty, about our health, about birth, and about what's actually best for our families. And most women don't even realize it until they're already in the system. Hi, my name is Lisa, the Sovereign Woman. I'm going live every single day for 31 days at 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday on YouTube and TikTok. This is for the woman who knows there has to be another way. A way to give birth without fear, without being controlled, without giving up her authority. Inside these lives, I'm teaching you how to surrender to God, trust your body, and step into a truly sovereign and fearless birth. Not from hype, not from rebellion, but from truth. So if you feel that pull, like something isn't right, like you were made for more than what you've been told, come join me. I'll see you live.
Paying federal income tax is voluntary. So why has every person you know done it their entire lives? You were told it's the law, but the system was built on a lie hidden in plain sight that you are required by law to pay. The truth is, 98% of Americans don't owe income tax by law. Federal income tax is for federal employees. For everyone else, it's voluntary. You agreed to pay when you signed your first tax return, and you've been renewing that contract every year since. Sounds too good to be true? You're asking, why doesn't everyone know this? Because almost everyone signed before they were old enough to understand it. It's time to unlearn the lie and break free from IRS jurisdictions, protect your assets, and keep more of what you earn legally. Visit unincorporatedassociations.com now and become tax-free.
All right, we're back. Technical difficulties are over. What a pain in the ass, man. All right, guys, so tonight we are not chasing a theory. We are following a pattern. That's what I'm really good at. A pattern that begins long before our time, written openly by men who believed they had found a better way to organize the world. There's a better way. You know, let us take control. Well, at the turn of the 20th century, industry was expanding, right? Right after World War II. Machines were multiplying, and society was becoming more complex than any generation had seen before. And in that moment, a new idea took hold. Not just how to govern people, but how to manage systems. Frederick Taylor wrote that in the past, man had been first, but in the future, the system must come first. Well, that was not hidden. That was published. And it marked a shift that would ripple through everything that followed. And from there, the language of society began to change. Work was no longer just labor. It became output. People were no longer just citizens. They became units within a process. Production and distribution were reframed as engineering problems, something to be measured, optimized, and controlled. Economies were described in terms of input and outputs, efficiency and waste, stability and breakdown. Well, the human element was still present, but it was being reorganized, fit into structures designed for performance, not for relationship. I want to take a step back here, and I'm going to go out on a limb on a theory. When you really look at a city from the top view and you see all the cars and people moving all around, there's really no difference between that and a CPU with energy. Energy going in and out of the CPU, running all around, opening, closing doors, etc. What if the fallen angels are turning us into a CPU and gaining information or gaining a computer or doing something with us as a CPU for their needs? Well, what if these technocrats back in the 30s, especially in Canada, started worshiping the devil and the devil gave them information? Well, I can't prove it, but it's something to keep our minds on. And then in the 1930s and 40s, those ideas reached their clearest form. A movement called Technocracy proposed something bold, that politics itself should be replaced. Not reformed, replaced. In its place would be a system run by engineers and technical experts, managing resources across entire continents. Money would be set aside, replaced by energy accounting. Borders would be redrawn, not based on nations, but on resource and systems. Society would function as a single coordinated mechanism, measured, balanced, and controlled for maximum efficiency. Well, that system was mapped, it was written, it was debated, and then, like many ideas born in crisis, it faded from public attention. But fading from attention is not the same as disappearing. Ideas do not vanish, they evolve. They move quietly into other disciplines, other systems, other ways of thinking. So now we come to the present. We live in a world where systems connect everything: supply chains, communication networks, financial systems, data flows. Decisions are increasingly guided by models, forecasts, and technical expertise. Governance has not disappeared, but it has changed. It blends representation with specialization, where influence remains broad, but control becomes more concentrated in those who understand the system. Regions begin to act as unified blocks, coordinating trade, security, and infrastructure across borders that once defined sovereignty. Well, this is not the same system that was proposed in the past, but the structure feels familiar. The language echoes. The direction aligns in ways that are difficult to ignore. So the question tonight is not whether history is repeating itself exactly. It is whether a pattern is continuing. When systems grow in scale and complexity, do they naturally move toward efficiency, consolidation, and control? And if they do, where does that leave the individual? Are these systems being built to serve people, or are people being reshaped to serve the system? Well, we are not here to force an answer. We are here to test the pattern. Because once you see it, you don't need to be told what to think. You can measure it yourself. You can compare what was written, what was built, and what is unfolding in real time right now. And from there, the question becomes personal. How do you live inside a system that is still deciding what it is becoming? This is the origin, when the system becomes first. The shift did not begin with technocracy. It began earlier, in the factories, in the rise of industrial organization, when scale introduced a problem that traditional thinking could no longer solve. As production expanded, the question was no longer how a craftsman worked, but how thousands of workers could be coordinated in a single process. Efficiency became the central concern, not as a preference, but as a necessity. Waste meant collapse. Disorder meant failure. And so a new kind of thinking emerged, one that placed structure above instinct and process above individuality. Well, Frederick Taylor formalized this shift through what he called scientific management. His approach was simple in concept, but far-reaching in consequence. Work could be studied, broken down, measured, and redesigned for maximum output. Each task could be optimized, each movement refined. The goal was not just improvement, it was standardization. The system would determine the best way to perform a task, and the worker would follow it. Well, over time, this thinking expanded beyond the factory floor. It became a philosophy of organization itself. At the center of that philosophy was a statement that would echo forward. In the past, man had been first, but in the future, the system must come first. Well, this was not framed as a loss, but as progress. The argument was that systems, properly designed, could eliminate inefficiency, conflict, and unpredictability. Harmony would replace competition. Cooperation would replace individual decision-making. Output would become the measure of success. The individual would still exist, but within a structure that guided behavior toward a defined outcome. Well, this thinking did not remain confined to industry. It spread quickly into the areas of society, including education, Schools began to adapt similar principles: standardization, measurement, efficiency. The goal was not only to educate, but to prepare individuals to function within organized systems. Learning became structured, performance became measurable. And the same logic that governed factories began shaping institutions. Well, what makes this moment significant is not that it introduced control, but that it redefined it, as control was no longer something imposed externally. Control was built into the system itself. And once a process was designed and accepted, behavior followed naturally within its boundaries. The system did not need to force compliance. It just simply guided it. And from this point forward, a foundation was set. Society began to see itself not just as a collector of individuals, but as an interconnected mechanism. And once that idea takes hold, the next question becomes inevitable. If systems can be optimized at the level of a factory, can they be applied to something larger? Well, can an entire economy be managed the same way? Can a nation? Can an entire continent? Well, this is the moment where the question first appears, when efficiency becomes the guiding principle, and the system quietly moves into first place. Now, once the idea took hold that work could be measured, optimized, and controlled, it did not stay confined to the factory floor. It expanded outward because the same pressures that demanded efficiency in production began to appear across the entire economy. Coordination became the central problem, not just how to produce goods, but how to move them, distribute them, and align millions of individual actions into something stable and predictable. The scale of society had outgrown institution or even intuition. And this is where the language began to change in a deeper way. Economists, engineers, and planners started describing the economy not as a market of human choices, but as a system, something with inputs, outputs, flows, and constraints, like a CPU. Production became an input. Consumption became an output. Transportation became a channel. Energy became a measurable unit of capacity. The goal was no longer just exchange, it was balance, stability, efficiency across the entire structure. Now, in this framework, the economy could be studied the same way an engineer studies a machine. If something slowed down, it could be adjusted. If something wasted energy, it could be redesigned. If demand and supply fell out of alignment, the system could be corrected. The more data that was gathered, the more precise the adjustments could become. And what had once been unpredictable began to look manageable. But something important happened in that shift. When you begin to treat an economy as a system, you inevitably begin to treat the people inside it as part of that system, not as a moral judgment, but as a functional reality. Workers become labor inputs. Consumers become demand signals. Behavior becomes something that can be observed, measured, and eventually influenced. The human element is still there, but it is translated into variables that the system can process. And this is where the concept of control evolves. It is no longer about direct authority over individuals. It becomes about shaping the environment in which decisions are made. If you can adjust the flow of goods, the availability of resources, the timing of production, you can influence outcomes without ever issuing a command. Well, the system itself begins to guide behavior. As this thinking developed, it brought with it a new kind of confidence. If production and distribution could be understood as engineering problems, then perhaps they could be solved the same way other engineering challenges were solved, with planning, design, and technical expertise. Fluctuations could be reduced, crisis could be prevented, efficiency could be maximized, not just in one factory, but across entire industries. And once that possibility is considered, the next step becomes unavoidable. If an economy can be engineered, who should be responsible for that engineering? Should it remain in the hands of markets and political negotiations, dynasties, or should it be placed in the hands of those trained to understand systems at scale? Well, that question sets the stage for what comes next. Because by the time we reach the 1930s, the idea is no longer just theoretical. It is being shaped into a proposal, a complete redesign of society built on the assumption that systems, not individuals, should guide the future. Here, we end at the point where society is no longer just organized. It is being reimagined as something that can be engineered. Now, by the time the Great Depression set in, the earlier ideas about efficiency and system design were no longer abstract. The existing economic order had broken down in full view of the public. Markets failed, banks collapsed, unemployment surged, and confidence in traditional political solutions weakened. In that environment, proposals that once sounded extreme began to sound practical. If the system had failed, then perhaps the system itself needed to be replaced. Well, this is the moment when technocracy emerged as a fully formed proposal. It did not begin as a hidden movement. It was organized, published, and presented openly. Its central claim was direct. The economic and political structures of the time were just outdated, unable to handle the scale and complexity of modern industrial society. Well, the solution, according to its proponents, was not reform, but redesign. Technocracy proposed that society be understood and operated as a unified system. Instead of separate institutions negotiating outcomes through politics and markets, the entire structure would be coordinated under technical management. Production, distribution, transportation, energy, and communication would be organized as interconnected functions, each feeding into the stability of the whole. The goal was not profit or competition, but balance and efficiency across the entire system. And at the center of this proposal was a shift in authority. Decision-making would move away from elected officials and toward those trained to understand and manage complex systems. Engineers, scientists, and technical experts. Aren't they being killed right now? I have no proof, but they're missing. Governance would no longer be based on representation, but on function. But those who understand the system would operate it. Those within the system would participate through their roles, but not through political influence. The economic model reflected this shift. Instead of money, which fluctuated and introduced instability, technocracy proposed an accounting system based on energy, the measurable capacity to produce and distribute goods. Every process would be tracked in terms of energy input and output. Consumption would be recorded. Production would be planned. The system would aim to match capacity with need, reducing waste and eliminating the cycles of boom and collapse that defined the previous era. Well, this required a different way of organizing society itself. National borders, as they existed, were seen as inefficient divisions that did not align with resource distribution or industrial capacity. In their place, technocracy proposed large-scale regions designed around natural resources and infrastructure. The most developed example of this idea was the Technate of America, a continental system intended to operate as a single coordinated unit. Within this structure, traditional political processes would no longer be central. Elections, parties, and legislative negotiations would give way to administrative coordination. Decisions would be made based on data, analysis, and system requirements. The expectation was that by removing political conflict and focusing on technical management, society could achieve a higher level of stability and efficiency. Sure, sounds good. If you could stop greed, which you can't in a fallen world, every ism, every techno thing you're going to write and put into place is going to fail because mankind always wants to be the top, the king of the hill. It's in our blood. Now, what makes this proposal significant is not whether it was adapted in its original form. It is that it articulated in clear terms a different way of organizing human life, one where systems guide outcomes more than individuals do. It took the logic of scientific management and extended it from the factory floor to the entire structure of society. So here the idea becomes fully visible. A complete system, designed on paper, proposing that the future should be governed not by debate, but by design. And if you're an engineer and you've studied this, this would make all the sense in the world to you. Well, yeah, if we just do what the machine says and do what the algorithm says, everyone will comply. Nobody will revolt. Everyone will be happy. Everyone gets a job. Everyone gets a home. See where I'm going? This is stuff that Elon Musk is really into. Technocracy. And some have debated that he's part of the movement. But another thing to consider is that when Trump stood in his second term doing his inauguration, standing behind him were all the tech lords. Why? Well, that's the Technate of America, the mapping of a continental system. By the early 1940s, the technocratic proposal moved from theory into something more concrete. It was no longer just a set of ideas about efficiency or system management. It became a mapped vision of how an entire region could be reorganized to function as a single, coordinated unit. This was called the Technate of America. The Technate was not drawn along political lines. It did not follow existing national borders or historical divisions. Instead, the Technate was designed around resources, infrastructure, and capacity, not supply and demand from all around the world. But if we have one region with resources and we know what the resources are underneath the ground, we'll know how much we can produce and how much we cannot, and we could build a better future around that. Well, the premise was simple. If society is to be managed as a system, maybe split it up into 10 regions like the Club of Rome was talking about. 10 kings. then its boundaries should reflect how that system actually operates. Rivers, energy sources, transportation networks, and industrial zones mattered more than flags or constitutions. Well, the map itself extended beyond the United States. It included Canada, Mexico, and parts of Central America and the Caribbean. Yes, and Venezuela. And this is the map of 1930s, the Technate map. It reached into northern areas of South America, and the goal was not expansion for its own sake, but integration. The region was selected because it could be made self-sustaining. It had the resources, the natural resources, the industrial base, and the population needed to operate as a closed-loop system, producing, distributing, and consuming within its own boundaries. Worldwide, we're seeing problems with globalism and how it fell apart because if one country couldn't keep up with what they're supposed to do, the whole system falls apart. Well, we were supposed to see the European Union as a prototype of the New World Order, and it failed. This idea of self-sufficiency was central. The Technate was designed to reduce dependence on external systems or external continents. Trade with other regions would not disappear, but it would not really be necessary for survival. The internal system would be balanced, energy production matched to consumption, goods produced in proportion to need, transportation organized for efficiency rather than competition. Now, in theory, this would eliminate the volatility that came from global market fluctuations. Ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs. On paper, this would be a utopia of marsupials. Now, to maintain that stability, the Technate included a concept of external defense, not in the traditional sense of territorial conflict, but as a protective perimeter. The system would be secured from disruption, whether economic, political, or military, so that its internal balance could be maintained. And this created a structure that was both expansive and contained, large enough to sustain itself, but bounded enough to remain controlled. Now, inside the Technate, governance would follow the same logic as the system itself. Society would be divided into functional sequences: transportation, communication, agriculture, industry, health, and others. Each function would be managed by those with the expertise to operate it. These functions would not compete with each other. They would coordinate. They'd get along. Sure. And the success of the system would depend on how well these parts aligned, not on how well they outperformed one another. Do you guys remember Klaus Schwab and his Fourth Industrial Revolution of merging mankind with machine? Well, this would have worked great with the Technate blueprint. But what stands out in this design is the absence of traditional political mechanisms. Representation, as it had been known, was not the organizing principle. Okay, representation, a leader. The system did not rely on negotiation between competing interests. Who will offer the lower cost? It actually relied on alignment within a structured whole. Decisions were to be made based on data, capacity, and systems requirements, rather than debate or ideology. or prayer. Again, the importance of this map is not that it was implemented exactly as drawn. Okay, if you've seen the 1930s Technate map, it looks just like Pete Hegseth's map and Trump's ambitions, forgetting Greenland, Canada, Mexico. It is that it demonstrates how far the idea had actually progressed. What began as a shift in thinking about efficiency had become a fully articulated model of continental organization. It showed what society might look like if it were built entirely around system logic. And now we have the blueprint fully visible, a continent, reimagined, not as a collection of nations, but as a single system designed for stability, efficiency, and control. And this brings us to the rise of expertise, from representation to management. Now, as the technocratic proposal faded from public attention, the underlying shift it represented did not disappear. It continued in a different form, less visible, but more widely accepted. Instead of replacing political systems outright, modern governance began to incorporate elements of technical management within existing structures. That's right, Scorpion. Klaus Schwab says, yell at the bugs and be happy. The result was not a pure technocracy, but a hybrid, one that combined representation with expertise. Now, this shift was driven by necessity as much as a design. Seriously. We started to rely upon algorithms, computers, assembly lines, budgets, financial flows of cash. And as systems become more complex, financial systems, energy grids, supply chains, communication networks, well, the ability to manage them required specialized knowledge. Geeks. Decisions could no longer be made safely through general consensus or political instinct. Like the shit problems that we're having with Washington, Oregon, and California as they compete with interests of America, being that's the country they live in, and wanting to be China in their socialist/communist environment. Well, if you go technocratic, it eliminates all of that, and society will be living in an algorithm where everyone will do their part, and the machine will tell us what to do. And it will make decisions based on the planet and your carbon footprint. That's coming. You have the choice to say no. They require data. This system. It requires loads of data centers. It requires modeling, technical understanding. And over time, what we've seen is they've been slowly pushing towards this. They created a new kind of authority, but it's not based on election, but on competence with the system. And you can see it when Trump stood and behind him were all the technocrats. Apple, Facebook, X. Microsoft didn't show up because Bill Gates had a ritual to perform. Joking. What emerged was a layered structure. At the surface, democratic processes remained in place. Elections continued, representation persisted. This is as technocracy started to merge inside society since the 30s up until now. But beneath that surface, many decisions began to move into domains where expertise was required. Regulatory bodies, advisory councils, technical agencies, and specialized institutions took on increasing influence. And these entities, they were not designed to replace government, but to support it. Kind of like a Trojan horse. Yet in practice, they began to shape outcomes in ways that were less visible to the public. Academic analysis reflects this transition. Scholars describe a movement toward combining democratic participation with what is often called meritocratic or expert-driven governance. Now, the idea is that public input remains important, but must be balanced with informed decision-making. In theory, this creates a more stable system, one that benefits from both participation and knowledge. In practice, it introduces a new tension. The tension lies in accessibility. As decisions become more technical, fewer people are able to fully engage with them. How many people you know are programmers? Not a lot. Well, the language becomes specialized. The processes become complex. Participation remains, but understanding becomes uneven. Now, this does not eliminate democracy, but it changes how it functions. Influence shifts towards those who can navigate the system, interpret the data, and operate within its structures. Now, this is not necessarily presented as a problem. In many cases, it is seen as progress. Complex systems require informed management. Technical decisions benefit from expertise. The goal is the goal is stability, efficiency, and accuracy. But the effect is a gradual rebalancing of where authority resides. It moves step by step from broad representation toward concentrated knowledge. And what makes this development important is the context of the earlier technocratic model is the continuity of structure. The idea that systems should be managed by those who understand them did not vanish. This is why we have Palantir. This is why we have Oracle. It was integrated, not as a replacement for politics, but as a layer within it. The system did not become purely technical, but it became increasingly dependent on technical control. Well, this is the point where governance is no longer defined solely by representation, but by combination of representation and management, where the visible structure remains, but the underlying operation begins to shift. Stick around.
Why do 75% of people feel exhausted all the time? The answer might surprise you. In the 1920s, Standard Oil decided to dive into medicine. They pushed synthetic petroleum into our drugs. Sure, it masked symptoms, but it wrecked our guts. Our good bacteria, which fight off parasites and heavy metals, got wiped out by crude oil. But here's the good news. We can fix this by going back to nature. Introducing Elite Potion, the world's top detox program. It restores your good bacteria by removing toxic threats like aluminum, strontium, barium, and parasites. Imagine feeling energized and alive again. They said there couldn't be a pill that did it all. We invented it. Visit elitepotion.com and reclaim your health from synthetic pharmaceuticals. Your body will thank you.
Back to the system, the Technate blueprint, which is slowly encrusting and integrating into our system like tentacles. Next, we're talking about the education and conditioning of the Technate blueprint and preparing individuals for the system. It looks like they're preparing us for this. Now, as system-based thinking expanded beyond industry and governance, it found one of its most lasting expressions in education. If society was to operate through structured systems, then individuals would need to be prepared to function within those systems. So education becomes the bridge between the individual and the larger mechanism. The shift did not happen overnight, but the direction is clear when traced through the early 20th century. As scientific management gained influence, its principles began to shape schooling. Standardization became a priority. Curriculums were organized into measurable units. Performance was tracked, evaluated, and compared. The goal was not to only transmit knowledge, but to create consistency, to ensure that large numbers of individuals could be trained in predictable ways. Well, this approach aligned with the needs of an industrial society. Factories required workers who could operate within defined processes. Systems required participants who understood structure, timing, and coordination. Education responded by emphasizing order, repetition, and measurable outcomes. Learning was organized into stages. Progress was quantified. And success was defined by the ability to meet established benchmarks. And at the same time, the consent and the content of education began to reflect the growing importance of technical knowledge. Literacy remained essential, but it was joined by new forms of understanding: mathematical reasoning, procedural thinking, and eventually technological literacy. Things like, what was that, math? Common Core. Well, these skills were not simply academic, they were functional. They prepared individuals to operate within systems that depended on precision and consistency. And what makes this development significant is not that education became more structured, but that it became aligned with the logic of the system itself. This is where you see you hand a kid a photo from your grandparents in the 70s, and they take the photo and they try to expand it. Have you seen this? Thinking that everything expands. Well, what makes this development significant is not that education became more structured, but that it became aligned with the logic of the system itself. The same principles that governed production, efficiency measurement, optimization began to shape how individuals were trained. Over time, this created a feedback loop. Systems required certain behaviors, and education produced them. A system evolved, education adapted, reinforcing the same patterns. Now, this does not mean individuality disappeared. Creativity, critical thinking, and variation continued to exist. But they existed within a framework that prioritized reliability and performance. The system needed participants who function within it, and education increasingly served that purpose. Now, in modern analysis, this process is sometimes described as the development of new forms of literacy, ways of thinking that go beyond reading and writing. Individuals are trained to interpret data, understand systems, and operate within complex environments. Well, this can be seen as empowerment, providing tools to navigate a changing world. It can also be seen as alignment, shaping behavior to fit the needs of the system. Well, this is the point where the individual is no longer separate from the system, but is being prepared through education itself to function as part of it. It's like training electrons to flow through a CPU efficiently without asking questions. Just do your job. All of this stuff can be backed by sources. All of it. I don't do shows unless I can back it up. This is happening, folks. And it's been in the works since the 30s. Next is the system expansion when technology enables control. Now, up to this point, the shift has been conceptual and structural. Ideas changed, systems were designed, institutions adopted, but there was always a limit. What could be imagined was not always what could be executed. Well, that limit begins to change as technology advances. Because once systems can be connected, measured, and adjusted in real time, well, the gap between design and reality starts to close. The development of digital infrastructure transforms what system management can actually do. Information, which was once slow and fragmented, becomes immediate and continuous. Production data, transportation flows, financial activity, and communication patterns can all be tracked across vast networks. What once required estimation can now be measured directly. Feedback becomes constant. Thus, adjustment becomes faster. This creates a different kind of environment. Systems are no longer static structures that operate in cycles. They become dynamic networks that respond in real time. And a disruption in one area can be detected quickly and compensated for elsewhere, meaning backup. Like random access memory, RAID. Pull one computer out while it's broke and put another one in, and the system still works. In the cloud. So supply chains can be rerouted, resources can be redirected, and decisions can be informed by large volumes of data rather than limited observation. As this capability grows, the role of human decision-making changes. It does not disappear, but it becomes increasingly mediated by the system itself. Models, algorithms, and analytical tools begins to guide outcomes. They process information at a scale and speed that individuals cannot match. And the system suggests, filters, and sometimes determines the range of possible actions. Philip says, James, all our systems in America need to be blown up. They're all going in the wrong direction for the people. All in the direction of the super elite. Oh, we're all going to die. Philip, calm down. Everything's going to be okay. You're not from here. If you're watching this show, you're most definitely a Christian. You're not from here. This is a warning for the non-Christians. This is what this is. That very soon we're going to be a technocracy operating under algorithms in a universal utopia. And what could go wrong? Well, this is Satan's new world order. It's just the next way of coming in because the old way that the black nobilities tried to bring in Satan, well, it all fell apart. And now they're coming in from the other side through technocracy, the next new world order. Hope that makes sense. But guys, you don't have to worry. You're not from here. You're just an ambassador representing the kingdom of heaven. And if you have a relationship with God inside, He will never leave you nor forsake you. And if you follow His commands, you will be loving your neighbor and you won't be worrying. Check your heart. No one needs to be blown up. Everything's going to be okay. Now, this is where the concept of control begins, and it becomes more subtle and more powerful. You could say control. I like to now just use the word influence. It is no longer necessary to direct behavior explicitly when the environment itself can be structured in a way that influences decisions. Access, availability, timing, and visibility, they all become variables that can be adjusted. And the system shapes the conditions under which choices are made. Now, at the same time, the integration of systems expands across domains. Financial systems connect with supply chains. Communication networks link to commerce. Identification systems begin to interact with access and services. What were once separate structures start to operate as parts of a larger network. The boundaries between sectors become less distinct. This expansion is often driven by practical goals. Everyone wants this. Everyone wants efficiency. Everyone wants security. Everyone wants convenience. Everyone wants stability. Wow. Sounds like a political move. Each integration solves a problem. Each connection reduces friction. But as the network grows, it also centralizes coordination. The more interconnected the systems become, the more it relies on unified standards, shared data, and coordinated management. Well, the result of a system that is capable of operating at a scale that earlier models could only describe. An AI fits right in like a glove. The principles outlined in earlier parts, measurement, optimization, coordination, well, those principles no longer are limited by physical constraints in the same way. They can be applied more broadly, more precisely, and more continuously. Here is the point where technology turns possibility into capability, where the management of systems is no longer just an idea, but something that can be implemented across large, interconnected networks. And all of these data centers that we're building more than most other countries. Well, we could be just like what the United Nations, or the European Union was. The European Union was trying to merge everyone together and then create a bunch of countries with different rules into one under regulations. And, well, Brexit happened. That was not good for the European Union, especially when they lost their number one military. Remember, the European Union had nothing to do with the United States, but Britain, for some weird reason, decided to exit it. Well, that changed. Was that by the hand of God? I don't know. But I personally think the UK just got invaded by Islam, and I think they're going to be Islamic soon and going to incorporate Sharia law. And I don't think Sharia law is going to be interested in technocracy. But we know that Bill Gates is, Elon Musk is, all the other technocrats are. Because on paper, in computational environments, it works. But man, when it gets into flesh, it ain't going to be jack shit. It's going to be another fallen piece of shit. Because people don't like being told what to do. Well, they're going to change that. When they get their utopia, their smart cities, everyone's going to be like robots. Regional integration here, guys. This is when systems outgrow borders, and we're starting to see this right now. As systems expand and become more interconnected, they begin to encounter a different kind of limitation. It's not technical, it's political. A bunch of fat cigar smoking asshole billionaires pushing ego and wealth against competition. National borders, which once defined the limits of governance and control, do not always align with how modern systems operate. See, what King George says doesn't go good with an algorithm. They don't go hand in hand. What King George was saying doesn't make sense with colonization. To take over a country, steal their resources, to give the people jack squat. This is why the technocracy movement was made, because they saw the dynasties controlling resources, raking in all the dough, and they said, fuck all of this constitutional crap. Let's do it based off of technocracy, technical algorithms that run the entire system, and get out of this. This is the new way, so we can finally go to the stars. Well, that's what they really think. I love you, Philip. And I'm glad you said right on. We all need to just chill. He says, if I was in school today, I'd be kicked out. Well, I remember going to school and I tuned out. I don't know whether it was I just tuned out of the conditioning and programming or what, but I just did the minimal I possibly could. I got out of there. I graduated. I went to some college, not a university. But I don't care. So national borders, which once defined the limits of governance and control, do not always align with King George. Supply chains across countries, right? And they cross countries. And energy networks span regions. Doesn't Canada supply America with electricity from their rivers? Well, that's cross-border crap that gets disrupted with political problems. Transportation and communication systems function across multiple jurisdictions now. So the system does not stop at the border, even if governance does. And in response to this mismatch, a gradual process begins. Instead of attempting to redesign systems to fit existing borders, policy begins to adapt borders to fit the system. Well, this does not happen all at once, and it does not eliminate sovereignty outright. It would take a millennia, or at least a century. And it appears first as cooperation, agreements to reduce friction, harmonize regulations, and improve coordination across neighboring countries. Well, in North America, this process can be observed through trade agreements and policy discussions that focus on integration. Economic partnerships expand beyond simple exchange. They begin to address infrastructure, transportation corridors, energy coordination, and regulatory alignment. And the goal is not only to increase trade, but to improve efficiency of the entire region of a system. So documents and policy proposals describe this very clearly. There is discussion of creating a single economic space where goods, services, and capital move with fewer barriers. And there are proposals for coordinated infrastructure, shared standards, and streamlined border processes. Security considerations are also included with the idea of managing external threats at a broader regional level rather than through isolated national efforts. Meaning more paperwork. But computers can handle all that. Meaning all of America, Canada, Mexico, and North Central America will be all under one system of protection in a national effort. Now, as the integration deepens, the nature of borders begin to shift, which we're seeing right now. They do not disappear, but their function changes. Instead of acting as strict divisions, they become points of coordination. Movement across them becomes more structured, more predictable, and in some cases more fluid. Internal barriers are reduced while attention shifts toward managing the external parameter of the region. This process is often framed in practical terms: competitiveness, security, efficiency, and in a global environment where other regions are also integrating. There is pressure to operate at a similar scale. A fragmented system may struggle to compete with the coordinated one, and integration becomes a way to maintain stability and influence. Now, what makes this development significant in the context of earlier parts is the structural similarity. The Technate model proposed organizing society at a continental level based on resources and systems rather than national identity. So modern integration does not replicate that model exactly, but it moves in a direction that reflects similar pressures. Systems expand, coordination increases, boundaries adapt, and you can't do any of that unless you have a one currency under that one area. So this is the point where the scale of the system begins to reshape the meaning of borders, not by removing them entirely, but by redefining how they function within a larger interconnected structure. This is where the tension comes in, where participation meets complexity. It's where we are right now. People are pushing back from any form of new world order. And the technocrats, they won't stop. As systems expand, integrate, and become more technically managed, a tension begins to surface, one that is not always obvious, but is increasingly difficult to ignore. It is the tension between participation and complexity. Now, on one side, society maintains the principle of representation. People vote, voices are heard, institutions remain accountable in form. On the other side, the systems that actually operate daily life through energy, finance, infrastructure, data, they become so complex that meaningful participation requires specialized knowledge. Well, this creates a quiet divide, not between rulers and subjects in the traditional sense, but between those who understand the system and those who function within it without full visibility. Decisions are still made within frameworks that appear open, but the depth of those decisions often lies in technical layers that are difficult for the general public to access. So language becomes specialized, processes become opaque, outcomes are shaped by models, data, and analysis that are not easily interpreted without some training. Well, in theory, this hybrid structure, is designed to balance the two needs. Democratic systems provide legitimacy and accountability. Right. While expert systems provide accuracy and stability. Well, the goal is to avoid the failures of both extremes, uniform, uninformed decisions making on one side and detached control on the other. But in practice, the balance is not always equal. As systems grow more intricate, the reliance on expertise naturally increases. Complexity then demands it. So this is where participation begins to change in character. It does not disappear, but it becomes more indirect. Influence is often expressed through broad choices, while the detailed operation of systems continues within specialized domains. So oversight exists, but it may not extend into full depth of how decisions are framed and formed. And the system remains open, but not equally transparent at every level, because a lot of people won't get it and understand it. And what emerges from this is not clear transition from one form of governance to another, but an overlap. Meaning we're going to be so dumbed down that we're going to have no choice but to concede to the technocrat system, because we don't understand how to program a VCR. The visible framework remains familiar, but the underlying mechanisms evolve, and we are not understanding how a CPU works. I don't understand. What does that mean? 4 trillion transistors in a CPU. What does that do? What's a transistor? How do gates open and close? What does that mean? Well, if you don't have an understanding, then you're just going to say, screw it. Take my money. Take my freedom. Take my lifestyle. Take my tradition. Well, this can create a sense of distance, but not necessarily intentional. But it's structural, and between the governed and the systems that govern outcomes. So this tension is not inherently negative. Complex societies require coordination, and coordination requires knowledge. But it raises a question that becomes more relevant as systems continue to expand. How does a society maintain meaningful participation when the system it depends on are increasingly difficult to fully understand? CBDC, or just tokenization, or just digital coins. If you guys don't even understand any of that, then you are at the mercy of the technocratic model, the Technate blueprint. But we're at a point here where that questions become unavoidable, where the structure of modern systems begins to challenge the ability of individuals to engage with them on equal terms. So right now we have a choice. We can choose to get involved in hardware and software, get involved in understanding robotics, understanding AI, understanding quantum mechanics, understanding where all of these institutions are going and how they work, so that we can modify our lifestyle under that understanding, or be dumbed down and be susceptible to society's rules, therefore a slave. This is the pattern I'm seeing. And what holds and what doesn't. Well, at this point, the question is no longer about any single idea, movement, or document. I think it's there. I didn't really think much about the whole 1930s technocracy movement, Technocracy Inc., and all of that stuff. But whether it was founded as an idea and died and then resurfaced in another, it is here. Whether we like it or not, it was born in the 30s, and it may have been put into adoption, but it came back and it wants to know who its mother and father are. This is really about a pattern that connects all of this. And when you step back and trace the line from early industrial philosophy to system design, to technocratic proposals, to modern governance and regional integration, a consistent direction appears. Now, it's not exact repetition and it's not a perfect copy, but it is a pattern that holds across time. And the pattern begins with a simple shift, placing systems above individuals as the primary means of organizing society. Do you remember when you used to be able to just take shit apart, cut the wires, put the wires in other places, tape them, put it back on, or take the battery out, charge it, put the battery back in, close it? Well, in Technocracy, they do that for you. And that's the problem. Because by this time, no one's smart enough to take apart an iPhone and understand what the problem is. It's too complex, too organized, too perfect. And that belief, well, from there it expands into the belief that the systems can be engineered, measured, optimized, and controlled for stability and efficiency. Now, that belief leads to structures where expertise becomes increasingly central, where decisions rely on technical knowledge, and where complexity requires coordination at larger scales. Meaning you're going to be left behind if you're not in it. And you're not going to have much power if you're not in it. As the scale increases, so does the scope. Systems extend beyond local and national boundaries, and they integrate across regions. They rely on shared standards, coordinated infrastructure, and continuous flows of information. Well, then borders adjust, governance adapts, governance, and the system becomes the framework within which everything else operates. So throughout this process, not everything carries forward unchanged. The early vision of replacing politics entirely with technical management does not materialize in its original form. It's actually happening right now where governors, senators, congressmen, they're all using AI now to write speeches. That's the problem. The system does not become pure technocratic, purely, but elements of that earlier thinking through efficiency, measurement, coordination, expertise, well, it does not disappear. They're absorbed, modified, and embedded within the structures that follow. This is why Apple hasn't left and moved to China. because they know that their technocracy is going to eventually take over government. And this is why the pattern matters more than the prediction, because it allows all of us to see what continues and what does not. It shows that systems tend to move toward consolidation, not because of a single decision, but because of the pressures that they face, complexity, scale, and the need for coordination. And it also shows that these movements are not hidden. They're well documented. They're even debated. And in many cases, they're implemented in parts. So what remains unresolved is not whether the patterns exist, but how will it develop? As systems continue to expand and integrate, the balance between efficiency and participation, between control and autonomy, well, that becomes more significant. Thus, the structure itself does not answer that question. It just frames it, puts it together, builds a solution, it passes, and then everyone uses it, and then you become obsolete. So we end here, not with the conclusion, but with clarity. The pattern's visible. The direction can be traced, and what comes next is not determined by a single idea or movement, but by how these forces continue to interact and how individuals choose to understand and respond to them. So to conclude, this has not been a story about a hidden system rising in the shadows. It's really been a study of ideas that were written openly, debated publicly, and carried forward in different forms all across time. From the early insistence that systems should come before individuals, to the engineering of production and distribution, to the proposal of a fully managed continental structure. And finally, to the modern reality of integrated networks and expert-driven governance, the thread itself has remained consistent. So what has changed is not the presence of the system, but its form. The original vision of replacing politics entirely did not take hold as it was written. It didn't go in the direction they wrote it in the 30s. But instead, elements of that vision were absorbed into the structures that already existed. And governance did not disappear, but it adapted to it. And participation remained, sure, but it really shifted. So systems expand, and with them come the need for coordination, measurement, and expertise. So the result is not a single unified outcome, but a layered reality. On one level, familiar institutions continue to operate. On the other, complex systems manage the flow of resources, information, and activity at a scale that earlier generations can only imagine. So these layers coexist, sometimes in balance, sometimes in tension, shaping the environment which decisions are made. Now, what matters now is not assigning intent or forcing a conclusion. It's really about recognizing the pattern clearly enough to engage with it honestly. Systems will continue to grow as long as complexity increases. So the question is how they are understood and how they are navigated. Whether they remain tools that serve human life or structures that begin to shape it, well, more than we realize, is not something decided in theory alone. It is determined over time through awareness, participation, and choice. Hey, this is where responsibility returns to you guys. Not to resist it blindly and not to accept it uncritically, but to understand that structure that surrounds them. Because once the pattern is seen, it can be tested. And once it can be tested, it no longer controls the narrative, it becomes part of it. Say no to technocracy. This has been Cause Before Symptom, where we don't chase symptoms, we test the cause against what is visible. We will see you guys mañana.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.